In the world of crime, the most terrifying stories are not the ones filled with chaos, but the ones built on silence, planning, and precision. Because when violence becomes organized, it stops looking like panic and starts looking like control. And that is exactly where this story begins. Not with a loud warning, not with a visible threat, but with a quiet certainty that something was already in motion long before anyone realized it. A certainty that powerful people are not always safe just because they are powerful. And that sometimes wealth does not protect you, it only makes you visible. Because in every system of security, there is always a gap, and in every life built on success, there is always a pattern. And patterns are what criminals study the most. This is the reality of modern high-level crime, where attackers do not rush blindly, but observe for days, sometimes weeks, where targets are not chosen randomly, but selected like calculations, where homes that appear secure are first mapped, routines are broken down, guards are studied, and every movement of a victim becomes part of a silent file written in the dark. And once that file is complete, execution becomes only a matter of timing, and that is when silence turns into impact. Because in this world, the most dangerous criminals are not the ones who act emotionally, but the ones who act like professionals. And when professionalism enters crime, fear becomes systematic, predictable, and far more difficult to escape. Imagine a man who believes he has built enough security around his life to never be touched. A businessman who has spent years building wealth, influence, and reputation. Someone who trusts the structure around him, the guards at his gate, the walls of his property, the routine of his life, not knowing that every one of those details can be observed, recorded, and eventually used against him. Because in organized crime, nothing is random. Even comfort becomes a weakness when it is predictable. And that is how targets are chosen, not because they are weak, but because they are important enough for the attack to matter, and visible enough for someone to study them. And once that attention is placed on a person, their safety begins to depend not on strength, but on awareness of unseen threats. This is where the story turns darker, because in cases like these, criminals do not act like street attackers. They act like operators, moving in teams, dividing roles, wearing protection, using modern weapons, and entering spaces with confidence that suggests prior knowledge. And when that level of coordination appears in a crime scene, investigators immediately understand that they are not dealing with ordinary thieves. They are dealing with a structured group that treats crime like a mission, where entry points are already known, escape routes are already planned, and reactions from security are already anticipated. And that is what makes these cases so difficult, because by the time the crime is visible, the planning is already over, the execution is already complete, and the only thing left behind is confusion, question, and a pattern that repeats itself in different places under different names, yet always with the same signature of control. And as this story unfolds, it forces us to face a harsh truth about modern criminal networks, that they do not always come with warning signs. They do not always announce their presence, and they do not always leave obvious trails. Instead, they operate in silence. And when they finally act, they do so with such precision that the aftermath feels less like chaos and more like a message, a reminder that in the world of organized crime, power alone is never enough, because there is always someone watching, always someone planning, and sometimes, always someone waiting for the exact moment when everything goes wrong. You may have heard stories about dangerous criminal groups, whispers of names that spread through fear and speculation, stories that people repeat in low voices as if speaking too loudly might somehow invite danger. But among all those stories, there exists one that feels different, something colder, more calculated, something that does not rely on chaos or desperation, but instead thrives on precision and control, a group that does not chase the weak, but studies the powerful, a group that does not strike randomly, but selects its targets with intention, a group that many refer to as the Bulletproof Jacket Group, a name that sounds almost unreal yet carries a disturbing weight for those who believe it exists. And at the center of this story lies a night that transformed a place of comfort into a scene of fear. A night that shattered the illusion that wealth and security are enough to protect a life. It was the night of March 31st, 2026 in Islamabad, a city known for its calm atmosphere and structured environment where people believe they are far removed from violent chaos. A city where influential individuals live behind guarded walls, trusting that their systems of protection are strong enough to keep danger away. And among those individuals was Amir Awan, a successful businessman whose name carried influence and respect, a man who had built a powerful presence in the corporate world through years of dedication and relentless effort. He owned a major Toyota showroom and several other thriving ventures. His life was defined by meetings, decisions, and constant movement toward growth. But like many who reach such heights, his success came at a cost, the cost of time. Time that his family often wished they had more of. His wife, Asha Awan, and his two sons, Asad and Aryan, lived comfortably, surrounded by the benefits of his achievements, yet they longed for moments where he could simply be present as a husband and father rather than a businessman. And when the idea of a family getaway finally became real, it felt like something rare and meaningful. The original plan was to travel to the northern areas, to spend time in the peaceful beauty of distant valleys. But Amir chose something closer, something that would allow him to stay connected to his responsibilities while still giving his family the time they wanted. He suggested they go to their farmhouse near Shahzad Town, a private property located away from the noise of the city, yet still within reach. It was a place designed for relaxation, with open space, controlled access, and security arrangements that were meant to ensure safety. Before the trip, Amir made sure everything was prepared. He contacted the farmhouse manager, instructed him to arrange food supplies, ensure cleanliness, and most importantly, maintain proper security. He believed in control, in preparation, in making sure that nothing was left uncertain. His family arrived first, excited and eager, especially the children who were looking forward to spending uninterrupted time with their father. Later that evening, Amir joined them after finishing his work, and for a few hours everything felt normal. They shared a meal together, laughed, talked about simple things, and created a sense of warmth that had been missing for a long time. It was one of those rare nights where life feels balanced, where success does not feel like a burden, where everything seems exactly as it should be. Eventually, the children went to their rooms to sleep, tired but happy, while Amir and Asha retired to their bedroom, unaware that the calmness surrounding them was about to be broken in a way they could never have imagined. Outside, 3 security guards remained on duty, their presence meant to ensure protection, their routine unchanged, their attention steady. But at around 3 in the morning, at a time when silence is at its deepest and the world feels suspended between darkness and dawn, something began to move toward the farmhouse. 5 armed individuals approached the property. They were not rushing, not hesitating. Their movements were controlled off a solid wall. Using tools they had brought with them, they cut through the wire quietly and entered without creating noise or panic. Their actions were smooth, practiced. As if they had done this before, their first destination was not the main house but the guard quarters. They entered quickly, pointing their weapons and forcing the guards to surrender without resistance. No shots were fired. No struggle took place. The guards were tied with heavy ropes and left unable to move. One attacker stayed behind to ensure they remained contained, while the others moved forward. And what happened next would become one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. They did not wander, they did not search, they did not hesitate. They walked directly toward the exact room where Amir was sleeping, as if they already knew where to go, as if the layout of the house was already familiar to them, as if this was not an intrusion, but an execution of a plan that had been carefully prepared As they moved up the stairs and reached the bedroom, time seemed to slow down. Inside the room, Amir suddenly woke up, sensing that something was wrong. Before he could fully understand the situation, the door opened, and armed men entered. The moment was immediate. Heavy with fear, he asked who they were, a question that received no answer, only silence filled with intent. Driven by instinct, he tried to resist, to protect himself and his wife. But the situation was already beyond control. The attackers had come with a purpose, and hesitation was not part of it. Within seconds, gunshots broke the silence, the sound echoing through the house. One bullet struck his abdomen. Another hit his leg. The violence was sudden, precise, and without hesitation. And just as quickly as they had entered, the attackers left, disappearing into the darkness without taking anything, without harming anyone else. Leaving behind a scene that was as confusing as it was tragic, Aisha began screaming, calling out for help, her voice filled with shock and fear. The children rushed out of their rooms, terrified and confused, yet unharmed. The guards remained tied, unable to intervene, and within minutes the police were called. Amir was rushed to the hospital, but the damage had already been done. The man who had built everything was now fighting for his life. And as the night began to fade into morning, the real question started to emerge. Because what had happened was not just an attack, it was something far more deliberate. Something that did not fit the pattern of a random crime. Something that suggested planning, intention, and knowledge. Something that would soon turn into a case filled with mystery, suspicion, and a growing realization that the danger behind it was far from ordinary. By the time the police arrived at the farmhouse and began securing the area, the initial shock had already settled into something heavier, something far more complicated than a straightforward crime scene. Because from the very first moments of inspection, it became clear that nothing about what had happened followed the usual patterns that investigators were trained to recognize. The silence inside the house felt unnatural, not because of what was present, but because of what was missing. There were no signs of forced theft, no broken safes, no missing valuables, no scattered belongings that would normally indicate a rushed robbery. Everything remained in place as if the attackers had walked through the house with a purpose that had nothing to do with money, and that single observation immediately raised the first major doubt in the minds of the officers present. Because in almost every case involving wealthy victims, the motive is clear and visible. Something is taken, something explains the risk. But here there was nothing, no gold, no cash, no valuables disturbed, which meant that the focus of the attack had never been the house or its contents. It had always been the man inside it. Amir Awan was not a victim of opportunity. He was a target, and that realization began to shift the entire direction of the investigation. Asha Awan, still shaken yet trying to hold on to clarity, provided her statement to the police, and her account only deepened the mystery. She described how the attackers entered the room with confidence, how they did not waste time searching or threatening unnecessarily, how their attention was fixed entirely on Amir, as if everything else in the room was irrelevant. She recalled their movements, their controlled behavior, and the absence of panic in their actions. And perhaps the most confusing detail was that they chose to leave her and her children alive, a decision that did not align with the behavior of violent intruders who typically eliminate witnesses to avoid identification. But in this case, the attackers showed no urgency to silence those who had seen them, which led investigators to consider two possibilities. Either the attackers were extremely confident that they could not be identified, or their mission was so specific that eliminating witnesses was simply not part of their objective. The CCTV footage collected from the farmhouse added further complexity. As officers reviewed the recordings, they observed 4 to 5 individuals moving calmly through the property, their faces covered, their weapons clearly visible, their pace steady and controlled. There was no sign of confusion or hesitation, no moment where they appeared unsure of their surroundings. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if it had been planned in advance. And this raised a critical question that would soon become central to the entire case. How did they know where to go? How did they navigate the property so easily? How did they move directly to the guards, then to the main house, and finally to the exact bedroom without searching? The level of accuracy suggested that they had prior knowledge of the layout, knowledge that could only have come from detailed surveillance or inside information. The guards themselves were questioned extensively. Armin, Daywood, and Kalimala provided consistent accounts of being overpowered quickly and restrained without resistance. They reported no prior warning signs, no suspicious activity before the attack, nothing that could have alerted them to what was coming. And while their statements appeared credible, investigators could not ignore the possibility that someone with access to the property had unknowingly or deliberately provided information to the attackers. This suspicion led to a broader line of inquiry that extended beyond the immediate crime scene. As multiple investigation teams were formed to analyze different aspects of the case, forensic teams examined the evidence. Intelligence units began tracking possible connections, and pressure increased rapidly due to the high-profile nature of the victim. Within a short period of time, reports began to emerge that several suspects had been taken into custody from different regions, particularly from areas known for cross-regional criminal activity. Weapons were recovered, initial interrogations were conducted, and gradually a name began to appear repeatedly in the investigation. Mansour Khan, a figure described by authorities as the leader of a structured criminal network, a network that had been operating for several years, with a level of organization that set it apart from typical criminal groups. This network, often referred to as the Bulletproof Jacket Group, had developed a distinct method of operation that emphasized preparation, coordination, and protection. Unlike ordinary gangs that relied on speed and aggression, this group focused on intelligence gathering and strategic execution. They conducted detailed surveillance of their targets, studied routines, analyzed security systems, and identified vulnerabilities. Before taking action, they wore bulletproof jackets during their operations, not as an optional precaution, but as a standard practice, ensuring that even if confronted they would have an advantage. Their targets were carefully selected, usually individuals with significant wealth or influence, people whose lives followed predictable patterns, making them easier to study and anticipate. The origins of this group traced back several years to the formation of a small network that gradually expanded through recruitment and coordination. Members were divided into smaller units, each capable of operating independently while following a shared structure, typically consisting of 4 to 5 individuals. Each unit was trained to execute operations with precision, minimizing unnecessary risk while maximizing effectiveness. The attack on Amir Awan fit this pattern almost perfectly, from the method of entry to the control of the guards and the direct movement toward the target. Every detail aligned with the operational style attributed to this group. As investigators continued their work, raids were conducted across multiple locations, leading to the arrest of individuals believed to be connected to the network. Among the evidence recovered was a mobile phone taken from one of the guards during the incident, a detail that helped establish a direct link between the suspects and the crime scene. Over time, dozens of individuals were questioned, and multiple locations were searched, each step adding more pieces to a puzzle that was still far from complete. Because even as evidence began to form a clearer picture, new questions continued to emerge. Was Mansour Khan truly the central figure behind the operation, or just one part of a larger system? How extensive was the network? How many individuals were involved beyond those already in custody? And most importantly, why was Amir Awan chosen? Was there a specific reason behind his selection, or was he simply one of many targets identified through a broader strategy? These questions lingered as the investigation progressed, transforming the case from a single act of violence into a complex inquiry into organized crime. And as authorities worked to uncover the truth, It became increasingly clear that what had happened at the farmhouse was not an isolated incident, but part of something larger, something more deliberate, something that suggested a level of coordination and intent that could not be ignored. And as this realization took hold, the focus of the investigation shifted once again from solving a crime to understanding a system that operated quietly, planned carefully, and struck with precision, leaving behind not just victims, but a trail of uncertainty that would take far more than arrests to fully uncover. As the investigation continued to expand and more layers of the case were uncovered, what initially appeared to be a single targeted attack gradually revealed itself as part of a much larger and more structured operation, one that extended beyond individual suspects and pointed toward a coordinated network capable of planning and executing high-level crimes with precision and discipline. The individuals who had been taken into custody were no longer viewed simply as attackers, but as components within a system, each playing a specific role in a process that had been carefully designed long before the night of the incident. During interrogation, some of the suspects provided limited information while others remained silent, but even the smallest details began to form a consistent narrative. The attack on Amir Awan had not been spontaneous. It had been planned over time through observation, surveillance, and analysis. His daily routine had been monitored, his movements tracked, and even the internal layout of his farmhouse had been studied in detail. This level of preparation indicated access to information that was not publicly available, which led investigators to consider the possibility that someone within his extended circle may have unknowingly or deliberately provided critical insights. This theory shifted the focus of the investigation toward identifying potential leaks, prompting authorities to re-examine statements from security personnel, domestic staff, and business associates, searching for inconsistencies or connections that could explain how such precise information had been obtained. At the same time, forensic analysis confirmed that the weapons used during the attack were modern and well-maintained, suggesting that the group had access to resources and supply channels beyond those typically associated with ordinary criminals. This reinforced the idea that the network was both organized and well-supported. As media coverage intensified, the case became a topic of widespread discussion, raising concerns about the presence of a coordinated criminal structure capable of targeting high-profile individuals. Some observers described it as a shift in the nature of crime, from impulsive acts to strategic operations, while others questioned whether such a network could operate without being detected for so long. Amid these discussions, one fact remained unchanged. A family had lost a husband and a father, and the impact of that loss extended far beyond the immediate Ghutna. Aisha Awan continued to cooperate with investigators, providing detailed accounts of the events she had witnessed. Her testimony helped establish timelines and clarify the sequence of actions taken by the attackers. She recalled their movements, their communication patterns, and the controlled manner in which they carried out the operation. Her ability to remain composed while recounting such a traumatic experience became a crucial element in strengthening the case. Identification procedures were conducted, and suspects were presented for recognition. Some were identified based on physical characteristics and behavioral patterns observed during the incident. But authorities remained cautious, acknowledging that the individuals in custody might not represent the entire network, because organized groups often operate through multiple layers, with different individuals responsible for planning, execution, and support. This understanding highlighted the challenge faced by investigators. Dismantling a single group of attackers would not necessarily eliminate the system that enabled them, and this realization added urgency to the ongoing efforts to trace connections and identify additional participants. As investigators compared this case with other incidents reported in nearby regions, similarities began to emerge, including the selection of high-value targets, the use of coordinated entry methods, and the emphasis on precision rather than confrontation. These patterns suggested that the attack on Amir Awan was not an isolated Ghutna, but part of a broader series of operations carried out using a consistent strategy. Despite the progress made in identifying suspects and collecting evidence, several critical questions remained unanswered, including the true identity of the individual or individuals responsible for organizing the operation, whether Mansour Khan was acting independently or under direction, and the extent of the network's reach across different regions. These uncertainties underscored the complexity of the case and the challenges associated with fully understanding the structure behind it. Investigators continued to analyze data, review communications, and examine financial records in an effort to uncover hidden connections, while also maintaining surveillance on individuals believed to be associated with the network. The process was methodical and time-consuming, requiring coordination between multiple agencies and the careful evaluation of information from various sources. As the case progressed, it became increasingly clear that addressing such a network would require more than immediate arrests. It would involve long-term strategies aimed at disrupting the systems that supported its operations. This included identifying recruitment methods, tracing supply chains, and understanding the mechanisms used to gather intelligence on targets. The investigation also highlighted the importance of strengthening security measures for individuals at risk, particularly those whose routines and environments could be studied and exploited. The aftermath of the Gutney discussions began to focus on the broader implications of the case, including the need for improved coordination between security services and private individuals, as well as the development of protocols designed to detect and prevent similar operations in the future. While these discussions were ongoing, the case itself remained active, with investigators continuing to pursue leads and gather evidence. The goal was not only to secure convictions, but also to uncover the full extent of the network and prevent further incidents. As time passed, the story of Amir Wan became more than a single case. It became a reference point in conversations about organized crime and security, illustrating how calculated operations can challenge even well-protected environments. It also served as a reminder that the perception of safety can sometimes conceal underlying vulnerabilities, and that addressing those vulnerabilities requires constant awareness and adaptation. The investigation into the attack continued with a focus on uncovering remaining connections and ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. But even as progress was made, the case left behind a lasting impact, raising awareness about the evolving nature of criminal activity and the need for proactive measures to address it. And while many details had been uncovered, the full picture had yet to emerge, leaving open questions about the structure, reach, and future actions of the network involved. Questions that would continue to shape the direction of the investigation and influence the strategies used to prevent similar incidents. Because in situations like this, understanding the system behind the crime is just as important as solving the crime itself. And until that understanding is complete, the story remains unfinished, not as a mystery defined by confusion, but as an ongoing effort to bring clarity to a complex and carefully constructed reality.